and you'll have the ability to look at these as reference. But let me turn this over to Jordan to kick us off. Thank you, Jordan.
All right, thank you so much. So excited to be here. Wish we were in person in the lab. But as was mentioned, my name is Jordan. I am a recruiter with Bloomberg. I have the pleasure of partnering with the University of Maryland and getting a lot of terps into the company. So we'll start off today with a brief presentation on the company. All of you have been now using the terminal for a bit, I understand. So won't go too deep into that since you're already becoming experts, but do want to share a bit more about the company, share about our opportunities, and get you all terminal experts jobs. So just as some quick introductions, as I mentioned, my name is Jordan. I've been with Bloomberg for about 3 years, and my job is traveling to college campuses, including Maryland. I typically kind of live there during the fall at the hotel, so wish we were there today, but that is what I do, and I recruit specifically in our global data department, but focus on all entry-level hiring. On the line, I also have Freya and Maya from our analytics and global data worlds, respectively. So Freya and Maya, if you would like to both quickly introduce yourselves as well.
Cool. All right, I'll start. Hey guys, my name's Freya. I graduated Maryland May of 2018. I actually majored in economics, but I did have a minor in the business school. I started at Bloomberg pretty much right away after I graduated. Started June 2018 in Bloomberg's global data department. I was data analyst there for a little bit. Decided I want to switch things up with my career and go to sales and work more on the client-facing side. So I switched over to analytics, our analytics department. And within analytics, I'm a senior equity specialist. So I help train our clients on all equity related functions on the terminal. If you ask me about fixed income, I probably won't know much, but with equities, I got you. And yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Hi everyone, my name is Maya. I didn't go to University of Maryland, but I went close by at George Washington University. I was a finance major there and graduated in 2018. I worked in DC for a year post-grad before coming to Bloomberg about a year ago this week. And I am on the equity side as well on a data team. And so I work with company financial data from their 10Ks, 10Qs, press releases, and their estimated broker data.
All right, thank you both, and you'll be hearing from them quite a bit later when we get to the fun stuff. But just wanted to share a bit more with you about who Bloomberg is as a company. So we've been around since the early 80s and were founded to bring transparency into the financial markets. So as you are probably learning in your studies right now, the history of stock trading and of the markets was not as easy as it is now. So the markets lacked transparency. It was very hard to execute trades. Everything was done very manual. You'd be working with data that was, weeks old at best. And so Mike Bloomberg sought out to bring technology and bring data into the space to make it more efficient. So we are known as really the primary distributor of financial data, but also very well known for our news and media coverage across the globe, specifically in the business world. So really what we're here to do is to use data and analytics to make the world better, make things work faster and easier. A bit more about, our clients, who we are as a company. Of course, you all know the Bloomberg terminal, so I don't have to spend too much time there. But within the terminal, we've got just over 330,000 clients worldwide. So we've actually seen quite an increase in usage and in sales since the pandemic began, because more and more people need this data in order to understand how to make their business decisions. So that is an ever-growing number across the globe. In terms of our employees, we've got about 20,000 employees in just under 200 offices worldwide. So our headquarters is in New York City, but we also have other offices in the US. Our Princeton, New Jersey office is home to our global data headquarters. We have an office in San Francisco, bureaus all over the country, other big offices in Tokyo, Hong Kong, London, Singapore, Mumbai as well. And of course, like I said, we're very well known for our work in the finance world, but we also work with a lot of other industries. So yes, sell side, buy side funds, everything you could think of in banking. But we also have a lot of data as it pertains to energy, sustainability, government law. I actually got my start working with our sales team in DC, serving Capitol Hill clients and government contractors. So there are tons of people, even outside of finance, that use this data in order to make their own business or government decisions. So there's a lot of stuff there. As you all have probably learned on the terminal, there is tons of information and a million ways to get to it. So a lot of different people and companies can find it very valuable. So in terms of how we work at Bloomberg, we like to say we work on purpose. We are a very fast-paced environment. We like to say we work at a smart speed because we have to. We have to get things in front of clients before they ask for them. And there's no time to waste when it comes to financial data because the markets move so quickly. And with that said, our employees are really empowered to have an impact, to disrupt things, to be really creative. My manager is a big fan of it being so crazy it just might work. And if it doesn't work, we'll move on to the next thing. So people are really open to trying a lot of different things as long as it's advancing our mission to get the most accurate and complete data in our customers' hands as quickly as possible. Our office space is just as transparent as our business model. So we have a really open office space. Our offices all look like trading floors. They all look very similar. And it's a very collaborative environment. So I sit right next to my manager. He sits next to his manager. And his manager is the global head of my department. And she's someone that I can just tap on the shoulder and someone that has a lot of influence within the company that I have a lot of access to. So that is, really exciting. Also, one thing I always like to mention is that no one at Bloomberg has a physical office. So even Mike Bloomberg sits at a desk the exact same size as mine. If you're ever at our New York City headquarters, he's on the 5th floor. He's a little bit busy, but everyone is there. So it's more about, your contribution. We don't really do job titles. A lot of firms, you'll go from associate 1 to associate 2 to senior associate 3, et cetera, et cetera. We don't really do that. We, of course, have titles, who your managers are, but it's more about what you're contributing to a project and a lot less about, what rank you are, how long you've been at the company. So it's really, not a hierarchy like you've probably seen at a lot of other firms. Talking about how we support our employees, we have a lot that we do, not only with our employees, but with the world. So, Bloomberg Philanthropies is our in-house foundation. It is a huge part of what we do within the community, and I'll get to that in just a moment as well. But in terms of how we support our employees, when we talk about career development, as I mentioned, we don't have formal titles. So it's really about where you want to go within the company. As I mentioned, I came from our sales organization into our recruiting organization. Freya moved from our data division over to sales and analytics. So it's really about the skills you have and how you want to build on them. We very much value diversity and inclusion. That's a huge part of how we recruit and how we work with employees. We have internal communities, also known as employee resource groups, around all types of identities. So we have our Bloomberg Women's community, Latinx community, Black professionals community, Be Proud, which is our LGBTQ community. There's something really for everybody. So you always have people that you can meet with, network with, and get to know even outside of your own team or office or department. And all of these communities are global, so you get to meet people that are in the London women's community or the, Hong Kong communities. So there's a lot of people to get to know there. In terms of well-being and work-life balance, Bloomberg covers healthcare for all employees, so everyone's very well taken care of. We have on-site health centers, we have flu shots, blood drives, a lot of ways to kind of keep your health top of mind while at work. And then in terms of professional development, we have an internal system called Bloomberg University. We've got classes on pretty much everything you could imagine: coding, Excel, presentation, communication. There's a ton of stuff you can take for free internally. And then we also offer a generous tuition reimbursement as well as CFA support. So there are a lot of ways to continue to grow both in the company and with higher education. So a bit more about Bloomberg Philanthropies. This is something that is really important to all of us at the company. Last year, the statistic was that we had 87% of employees participating in some sort of philanthropic, diversity, or well-being initiative. So the company is really, really engaged. Bloomberg Philanthropies, as I mentioned, is our in-house foundation that works with a lot of different types of causes. So public health, gun violence, environment, sustainability, government innovation, education, all over the world. You can learn more by visiting bloomberg.org. There's a ton of awesome resources there. We've been doing a lot of work specifically as it pertains to COVID-19 and contact tracing and tracking and trying to understand the disease. So definitely check that out. There's a lot of really cool stuff there. Something I always like to mention is that at Bloomberg, the vast majority of our revenue goes back directly into community service. So what that means for us is that 85% of our profits go back into community service and philanthropic work, which is a pretty high number. I wasn't a finance major, I'm no mathematician, but that is a lot of money. So to give you sort of a benchmark in the tech space right now, it's a really big deal for a company to give about 1 to 2, maybe 2.5% back into community service or philanthropic giving. So we've been going with 85% for a really long time, and we're going to keep doing it. We offer a lot of employee programs, so we have service events happening all the time, and if you do 25 hours of service in a year, in or outside of the company, Bloomberg will donate $2,500 in your name to an organization of your choice. If you do 50 hours, they'll donate $5,000. If you refer a friend to work at Bloomberg, at most companies you'd get a bonus in your paycheck, which is great, but at Bloomberg they'll donate $2,500 to an organization of your choice if your friend gets the job. So they make it as easy as possible of doing the things you were already going to do to have employees be engaged in charitable giving and philanthropy. So the fun stuff, what are the jobs that we have? So we have a lot of different departments that are always looking for talented entry-level candidates. First being our financial product analytics and sales department, quite a mouthful. That's the department that Freya works in, and this is a department that provides you really with a total 360 deep understanding of the Bloomberg terminal, and then you will go and help clients use it. So you work with our clients on their usage, using it effectively, explaining how things work to them, managing our relationships. So you will make sure that we are growing our presence, maintaining our presence. It's not a cold call type sales job, right? Most people who need a terminal have one or are getting one. Most people do know about it. So it's more of that sort of consultative partnership and working with our clients. Our customer support department, this is a really great place for anyone who's interested in that sort of technical support world. I like to say, if you're that person in your family who your mom always calls and she's like, the iPhone's not working, what do I do? This is a good place for you. So we have a 24/7 human helpline where if anyone calls, the first thing they get is a real person at Bloomberg. So we have people all over the world speaking multiple languages, helping our clients in all of our countries navigate the Bloomberg terminal and fix any sort of technical errors. Our global data department, I work very closely with this group. This is the department Maya works in as well. We're always looking for people that are interested in the intersection of tech and finance and have some of those technical skills. So if you're interested in finance, in the business world, in economics, and you also have some level of coding ability, this is a really good fit for you. Our data analysts manage all the data on the terminal, which, as you know from using it now, is a lot. So we have a lot of great positions available there. Our news department, if you've got some journalism experience, we're always looking for business writers. We have a huge radio contingency as well as podcasts, all different types of news as well. And then our client financial services department, this is a great department for anyone that is interested in accounting type work, is interested in sort of that intersection of working with clients and working with internal budget. So more of an accounting operations role, but really great place to start as well. In terms of who we look for, always looking for people who have collaboration skills, who've worked on group projects, who have extracurricular activities on their resume. We love to see an interest in finance. Of course, it lends itself very well to being at a place like Bloomberg. And then in terms of technical skills, for our more technical roles, we're always looking for people with knowledge of things like Python and SQL. But other than that, it's great to see proficiency in Excel. Last but not least, what are we hiring for? So for sophomores or 2023 grads, we have externships every summer. We start recruiting for those typically in the winter. And that's a 3-day sort of deep dive into Bloomberg, learn us a little bit better, learn the company, learn what we do, and then also interview for the next summer's internship. So if you come to our externship in 2021, you could leave with an offer to join us in 2022 for our 10-week summer internship. The internship is also open for current juniors. It's a 10-week program, hopefully back in the office next summer, although we did it virtually this summer, and we will do it again if we need to. But that is a great program to get to know us better, work on a lot of projects, and hopefully leave with an offer to return with us full-time. And then, of course, we're hiring for full-time employees across many different business lines for folks graduating this December through next May. So in terms of where you can find these things, we are currently posting all those jobs, and these will be up on HireSmith within the next couple of weeks. But I'm also here to answer any questions at the end or in follow-up about our opportunities. With that being said, want to make sure that we have enough time for the fun stuff. So I will turn it over to Freya and Maya now to go through some really exciting stuff on the terminal.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Jordan. Hey guys, so I'm going to start off today. What I'm going to cover is going to be more so utilizing our Bloomberg News tools, to analyze company or analyze, just a broad, universe or broad market. Then we'll also go into looking at pricing data and market data, right? It's looking at prices, bids and asks, exchange data, things like that. And then I'm going to pass that off to Maya, who will talk more so about fundamental analysis. She'll also go through RV because I think some people had questions about like comp source in the chat. So she'll also talk about that. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, so hopefully you guys can see my screen. It's the terminal panel. So let's talk a little bit about Bloomberg News. So aside from the terminal, when you hear Bloomberg, I'm sure you guys have heard of Bloomberg News. So our news offerings are a big part, of our product, and it's a big part in how our clients, make investment decisions, right? News plays a big role in how companies perform, whether or not there's, breaking headlines about a company, something happens to a company or a company, they report earnings, things like that, right? So you want to keep on top of that because that does affect, how a company, ends up performing. So I like to think of this kind of in like a top-down approach. What I mean by top-down approach is going from like a macro level analysis more towards a micro level. So a function that I recommend everyone check out is Daybreak. The function is DAYB. That's a mnemonic you're going to run at the top in the command line. DAYB. So DAYB is really great because this is something where, I'll wake up in the morning and I'll make myself a cup of coffee, and while I'm drinking my coffee, this is what I'll read. This has everything you need to know about the markets, about politics, any current events, what's going on abroad. So in, Asia Pacific region, also specific asset classes, like what's going on in the commodities space, what's going on with oil, you know what I mean? And so this basically has everything you need to know to really start your day. And it's a good way to keep up with current events. So Daybreak is awesome. I definitely recommend that you check it out. So usually once, you start out reading Daybreak and you get a good understanding of, what's going on in the macro, on the macro level, what's going on right now in this world. This is where, we can kind of break it down even more, right? So let's say that you have a list of securities that you're looking at, or you're analyzing a specific company. I have Tesla loaded right now, and I'll just, load it again for you all. And with Tesla, if I want to maybe take a look and see, okay, what are some news articles coming out right now about Tesla? I can run a function called CN. CN stands for individual company news. CN is going to load all the news articles in a time-ordered fashion for the company you have loaded on your terminal panel. So you'll see when you load this at the top, I'll always have the top 3 news articles here. It's based upon viewership, right? So the more popularly clicked on an article is, the more likely of a chance it'll end up being a top-ranked news. And then on the bottom half here, it's just time-ordered news. What's really great about you guys, each of you having your own Bloomberg account, is that you have access to all of our premium news sources. So what I mean by that is, aside from our Bloomberg news source, you have access to New York Times, Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal. Those are all things that you typically would have to pay a subscription fee for, but because you have a Bloomberg account, it's all free for you, right? So you can access all those articles here. So good, good function to run just to browse any sort of news on this company. Something else that I also find really interesting is our automated reporting tool. What I mean by that is we have a function called AID. It's our automated intelligence on demand. When you run AID on the security you have loaded in the terminal, it's going to generate an automated report where it's going to pull from, like, Tesla's earnings, going to pull from Tesla's price movements, going to pull from any news headlines, going to pull from any estimates or analyst recommendation upgrades or downgrades. It's just going to basically auto-generate this report for you every time you run it. So every time you run it, if you run it once in the morning, once in the afternoon, you'll get different results, especially with like market data, because markets move during the trading day. But this is really cool because, again, it really just kind of summarizes in this report format of what you need to know about Tesla right now. So this is awesome. And you can also save it as a note. You can export it. You can send it to your colleagues or whatnot. This is great. We also have a function called KI. KI stands for Key Insights, and Key Insights is really cool. Again, it uses our automated intelligence, but it breaks it down even more. What I like about KI is that it basically tells you everything you need to know in one sentence. So it's a quick way to just to read through this, and you'll get a good understanding of what's going on with the company. And you can also click on any subtabs if you want to specifically look at valuation. You can do that. If you want to look at estimates or fundamentals, any industry analysis, you can do so as well. So this is also a really great function. And then, aside from that, we have something else called BICO, B-I-C-O, or BICO. And this kind of shifts us more towards a researcher, sort of like a cross between like research and news, sort of. So within Bloomberg, our company, we actually have research analysts that work at Bloomberg, and basically these research analysts will cover specific sectors, and within those sectors will cover specific securities. And so if you run BICO on the ticker that you have loaded, it's going to pull in the Bloomberg Research Company Outlook for this company. So I'm looking at Tesla's company outlook right now, and I can see Kevin and Andreas, they're both two Bloomberg intelligence analysts that cover Tesla. So I can take a look at this as well to maybe get a perspective, on where we think Tesla is going to be in the future. So BICO is also really great. And last thing, we also have a social media aspect on the terminal as well. And when you think about it, social media is growing, and it's a part of everyone's lives now at this point. And social media can also affect the way that a company performs. So we have a function called TWTR, which stands for Twitter. And this is really cool because when you load this at the top, you can search for a specific security. So let's load Tesla. And then you're going to see on the right-hand side, you're going to see all relevant tweets about Tesla. With Bloomberg, we filtered out any sort of junk accounts. You're not going to see a celebrity gossip account. You're not going to see a meme account or anything like that. It's all going to be like pretty relevant, like sources or pretty relevant Twitter handles that you'll be able to see here. It's really interesting because I don't know if you guys remember, but a couple years back, Kylie Jenner made a tweet about Snapchat being down or something, was wrong with it, and the price of Snapchat fell after she tweeted that. So it's always important to keep track of what's going on in the social media world as well. So that's pretty much news. Anyone have questions on any of the news functions that I went over? Just open the chat. Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit about looking at price movements for security or group of securities. I'm going to do kind of a macro level approach and then just bring it down more towards company specific. So we think about price, right? We think about how a price of a security moves, right? It can go up and it can go down. You can buy a security on one day, you can sell a security, on another day, and hopefully you'll make some sort of positive return on investment, right? It's positive return. I think it's interesting to always start out and look at it on a macro level. So let's take a look at WEI. WEI stands for World Equity Indices. Again, this is going to show you basically globally all around the world, what are the major benchmark indices. And these indices basically represent the stock market for that country. country. So we know that here in the US, the S&P 500, Dow Jones, and NASDAQ are the big ones. In Canada, it's the TSX. In Brazil, it's the IBovespa. We have the FTSE 100 in London, the Nikkei in Japan, right? So we have all these different ones. Now let's say that we're looking at the S&P 500, right? We can analyze and take a look at where the S&P 500 is now. We can take a look at its change. So its net change is negative 41.22 points. So it's down today, right? So we can take a look at this. And it's always important to always keep track and see, you know, where the movement of the generic benchmark stock market is performing. So this is where you can look at, again, all the different stock markets and how they're performing across the globe. Now, what's really cool is you can actually click into any of these indices here. So if we click into the S&P 500, we can actually take a look at the sector performance, right? This is going to be, it's going to basically look at price change broken down by sector. Then this is using GICS. GICS is one of the classification systems, which Amaya will talk a little bit about in her fundamental analysis, but we're taking a look at how each sector is performed in the S&P 500, right? So far today, because looking at intraday data, the information technology sector is not doing well. And what's really cool is that we can actually, you know, kind of click into each sector and break it down even more. So we actually have two small sectors here that actually are performing really well today. We have the consumer durables and apparel sector and the consumer services sector. So if we click the consumer services sector, right, it's going to break it down even more. And within the consumer services sector, we have the hotel, restaurant, and leisure subsector. We can click into that and we have the restaurant subsector, the hotel resorts and cruise lines like subsector, and then the casinos and gaming subsector. So if I'm interested, it looks like the restaurant sector is actually so far today performing really well, has a positive price change. I can click on that. This is actually going to show me the securities that are part of the S&P 500 that are in this restaurant subsector, and I can analyze it and break it down even more this way, right? So this is really cool, and you can kind of, you know, maybe pick and see, you know, what security you're interested in analyzing even more. You can do fundamental analysis on it, but this is kind of a cool, like, more macro to micro level approach that you can use. Something else that we have is a function called MOST, M-O-S-T. MOST is also really interesting because you can basically look at a big universe of securities. And right now I'm looking at the S&P. As you guys can tell, at the top left-hand side, I have the equity index set and I have the S&P set. So looking at all of the securities in the S&P, and we can look and see, okay, today it looks like Apple, you know, they have the most volume traded so far out of all the securities in the S&P. I wonder why that is. And what's really interesting is right next to this, we actually have a news headline that shows up right next to this. You can take a look and see what the relation is between news and also seeing, you know, what's going on with the trading volume for these specific securities. We can also look at the change up. So for today, Nike has had a positive 8.82% price increase, right? And we can see the news related to it. Nike soars to record after sales, profits surge, right? So it's a good news headline. It's probably a good explanation as to why Nike's price has changed so much today. So again, this is another great function if you're maybe looking to do some idea generation and find some securities that you might be interested in looking more into. And I think this would be good if you guys are working on that trading challenge project, you're trying to find profitable securities. This is a good way to take a look at market data and see what securities or sectors are performing well. So let's look at an individual company's price performance, right? Why don't we click on Nike? So when I click on Nike, now it's loaded. A couple things. First, we have the description page, DES. Now on the description page, you're going to see at the top, we have you know, just a bunch of these numbers here. I'm sure you guys know this is the quote line. So this number right here, the 127.06 is the last traded price. And then we also have the bid and the ask. We also have volume and other important, you know, key market metrics here at the top in the quote line. So always good to just, you know, you can always take a look at that top part to get an understanding of how the security is performing in the markets right now. And then the bottom section here, we have other important data. We have market cap, shares outstanding, 52-week high, 52-week low, the dates when they occurred. 52-week high actually occurred today. So that's great for Nike. And so there's some good high level information here on the bottom left-hand side of the dead screen. If you want to get a better picture of how Nike has performed historically, you can run the function HP. HP stands for historical price table. So this is really cool because this is basically going to show you historical price and volume for Nike over time, right? So we can see how price has changed, you know, for Nike, you know, from my start date and end date, and kind of analyze that there. You can also change the fields here at the top. If you don't want to look at last price, you can look at bid price or ask price, you know, the volume weighted average price, right? So you can select the fields up here if you want to change that. So that's really cool. So this is going to show us all the historical prices in like a table format. We can also get it in like a chart format, and the charting function to run is called GP. GP is how you're going to actually graph the historical prices on a line chart for a security, right? So same thing, we have all the last prices of Nike historically on this line. You can change the start date and end date at the top. You can click max here if you want to start from the IPO date all the way up until where it's at now. So you can do that. The most useful part about this function is this edit chart functionality here at the top right. When you click on edit chart, this is where you can add more fields, add studies, add events, which I'll talk about. You can change the color, you can edit how this chart looks, right? And so it's really cool. Like, let's take a look at Nike, and then let's add in another security. Let's add in Adidas, for example. So we can add in Adidas. So we can compare Nike. Okay, come on, enter. So we can compare Nike with Adidas and see, you know, how they're performing. We have something called Normalize. And Normalize basically lets you compare both securities kind of at an equal level, if you know basically that's what it is. So I have it normalized by a factor of 100, which means that we're starting at a value of 100, and then we can kind of compare and see where Nike is and where Adidas is. So Nike's at 114, Adidas is at 116. So normalizing lets you compare apples to apples, basically. So you can add in multiple securities here. You can add in more fields. Like if I wanted to add in, you know, a field for market cap, I can type in market cap and it'll show up in the drop down, and I can select that as a field. And then I can graph the market cap for both. It's a little bit slow today. Oh, intraday chart. So we'll just do turnover, which is the value traded. So you can add in different fields up here. Something that's really cool though is that we can also add studies and events. So I'm sure you guys have heard about the technical analysis method. It's another way to analyze the performance of a company based upon the price movements of that security, right? So instead of looking at fundamental data like earnings per share or revenue values that the company's reporting, we're really focusing on how the price has moved for a security, right? So a lot of times technical analysts, they'll maybe look for patterns in a price chart. They might look for like head and shoulders or something like that. The whole idea is like history repeats itself, right? So if there's a pattern that they spotted earlier on, it'll probably happen again. That's the kind of, you know, theory behind it. But we actually have a lot of technical analysis studies that we can add in as well. You can add in something called, you know, the simple moving average, right? So I can type in moving average and I can add in the 200-day moving average. And now I have the 200-day moving average line up here. We have other more complex studies. We have things called Bollinger Bands. We can add a Bollinger lower band, a Bollinger upper band. We have a relative strength index, which will tell us if a security is overbought or oversold, right? So we have all these different studies that we can add. And if any of you guys are interested more so in technical analysis, what you can do is you can run this function called TECH. TECH stands for tech. This is going to show you all the different technical analysis studies that we have on the terminal that you can add onto a chart, and has a definition of it and everything. So it's, you know, just good to know if you're interested in using this. And then lastly, we have really cool events that we can add on to this. So what you can do is you can click on browse here at the top right, and then let's click on events. So when we click on events, it'll bring us to a bunch of different events that we can keep track of. We can take a look at crises like earthquakes and hurricanes. We can take a look at the political office, right? Like who the current president is, who's in the US House, or who the US senators are, right? We can add those as events. I think what's really cool though, and what I usually use, I use something called key events. So if I just type in key events here, and you'll see it show up in the drop down under event. basically this is going to flag whenever there is some sort of major key event that occurred, for a security. A lot of times it'll be breaking news headlines or major news headlines, but other times it could be something like, Nike was downgraded, by an analyst, right? Or something like that, or like, a bank decided to upgrade Nike, right? So a lot of these major events that definitely affect the price of security, you can add it on this chart and it'll flag when it happened. So it's pretty cool. You can also add in like news headlines. So bringing it back to news, if I just typed in headlines, you'll see news headlines as an event. And then at the top, you can see now we can kind of scroll through all the different news headlines that have occurred for Nike, historically over time. So you can kind of take a look at that as well. Other, important functions to take a look at when looking at, market data. We can also look at intraday data, right? QR is a good function to look at intraday trades and intraday bids and asks. You can take a look. We have Nike loaded here at the top, and you can see that Nike is a fairly liquid security. So even within the millisecond at 239.20, there was like 10 trades that occurred, right? So you can kind of take a look at the tick by tick trade data on this function. We also have quote recap if you want to look at the tick by tick bids and asks that occurred, over time. So you can take a look at that through QR. And then aside from that, I would say that's pretty much it. Another useful one that's quite popular is our VWAP function. So those of you that know what VWAP is, that's a volume weighted average price. It's commonly used as a benchmark by traders. Generally speaking, you want to buy below the VWAP, sell above the VWAP. So you can take a look and see what Nike's volume weighted average price is, right? So it's weighed by the volume of every single trade that occurs. The VWAP function is cool because you can analyze top trades. So at 9:30 today, there was a trade that was about the size of 477,035 shares. It's a huge, huge trade. So you can kind of analyze that as well. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have in terms of looking at market data and pricing data. Does anyone have any questions before I pass it off to Maya, who'll talk about fundamental analysis?
I got a question real quick. What's a function that you use personally like the most?
Just in general, or when we're like analyzing a security?
Mostly like analyzing a security, or even in general, like that works too.
Yeah, definitely. So I use MOST a lot in terms of analyzing like pricing data. I just think it's cool to take a look at every single day, right? To see what's going on, how these securities, within the US exchange or within the S&P 500 have changed and how that has affected the stock markets. So I think that's really cool. Like I said, I use Daybreak every single day as well to keep up with the news. Other things, Trend is really cool. TREN. This is a way for you to take a look at all these different companies, and it'll basically show you news readership activity, news sentiment, and Twitter sentiment. So for some reason today, there's been a lot of new news viewership on General Mills. Like for some reason, the company General Mills must be like some breaking news coming out about them because there's been a ton of viewership for that company. We can also look at sentiment. So we'll basically take a look and see which companies had the most negative tweets and which company had the most positive tweets, right? So right now, this Vital Holding has like a lot of negative tweets going on about it. News sentiment too. So we take a look at positive news headlines and negative news headlines and kind of take a look what's going on by security here as well. So all of this is really cool. And aside from that, I just look at fundamental data. So I pay attention to earnings. So we have like an EBTS function to see, when earnings are going to come out for a specific security or for a list of securities. FA, which Maya will talk about, to look at, just the fundamental securities. So what the revenue was for Apple last quarter and things like that. So that's kind of what I look at the most. Actually, you know what? I'm going to toss in something else before I pass it off. But we have a function actually called virus. This is kind of like I consider it to be like a news function, but it's kind of got a mixture of everything in there. Within virus, this is really cool because you can actually see the companies that are affected the most so far by the coronavirus. You can take a look at You can look at the COVID-19 drug development here. We can take a look at any news going on. I have it set to Asia. I'm going to go to the United States. We can take a look at any news regarding the coronavirus outbreak up here. We have a case count. We have a chart. So this virus function has been really popular, and I've been using it pretty frequently so far. So yeah, that's a good question.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
As far as social media, do you guys just look at Twitter sentiment, or do you take that
Yeah,
data?
for now it's just Twitter sentiment. I think it would be hard for us to utilize something like Instagram or Facebook, right? Because Instagram is all pictures. It's like it's not really something we can like read through that like our like kind of like automation can read through. So Twitter is the easiest because it's like reading through tweets. So from what I know, I only know of Facebook. I only know of Twitter right now being a social media platform. I think it's definitely an initiative for us to incorporate it even more because it is just growing and it is a really big part. Of how the markets move.
Okay, thank you.
It's a good question. Anyone else have any questions?
Just one quick thing. So just to clarify, the triangle outbreak, is that just like since the outbreak, the change on the systems? Like, yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be the price change since coronavirus started, basically, since the coronavirus broke. And I would say this probably since like mid-March, it should be. It says year to date, so this might be from January 1st. But the whole idea is supposed to show us a change in price since the beginning of the outbreak of coronavirus.
Wow, that's nice.
All right, any other questions? All right, cool. So Maya, I'm going to pass it off to you. She'll talk a lot more about everything fundamentals.
Awesome, thank you. Let's see. Okay. So I actually just wanted to, before I dive into everything, touch on what Freya mentioned about like Nike was at its 52-week high. That thing goes away. So if we take a look at what may have caused that for Nike, we can actually see, I'm going to go to company filings right now. We can take a look and see that Nike reported earnings yesterday. And I'll touch on all of this when I say surprise and everything, but Nike surpassed, they beat earnings. They beat what the street estimated for them, hence why they're at their 52-week high. If you want to see what companies are reporting, you're gonna go to EVTS-ER. And so it looks at all companies that are gonna be reporting. So companies report either before or after market. So like sometimes during earnings season for me, I'm up at 5 a.m. and I have 5 or 6 companies reporting. Honestly, it's kind of fun because you're one of the first people that gets to see the data that moves the market. But you can come here and you can filter it down based on like the time frame or based on like the specific security. So if I want to see like when one of my companies reports, it's not within the next 7 days, is it in the next 30 days? So I can see that they are tentatively reporting on the 23rd, so a month from now. And that helps me prepare. So I just want to touch on that briefly before I dive into everything else. But as I mentioned, American Airlines is one of my companies. So within company financials, our teams are broken down based on industry and portfolio coverage. So I have a portfolio of a couple thousand companies that are in the airline industry. So also aerospace and defense and other passenger transportation like rail. But we're going to focus on the airline industry today. So when I came from my prior role, I didn't know much about the airline industry. I came from the banking industry. So one of the things that really helped me familiarize myself with this industry was looking at Bloomberg Intelligence. So as Freya mentioned, though, we have research analysts within Bloomberg that focus on specific industries and different areas of coverage. And so one of the first things that I did was I just went to, I have like a little button up here that I've saved because I view this frequently. But it takes me to the airline board for aerospace and defense for Bloomberg Intelligence. The mid-year outlook is a really great place to start. It gives you a big breakdown of the industry, the impact of COVID-19 right now, and some key operating metrics used to analyze performance. So you can see like a lot of it is impacted by suppliers, and I'll touch on the supply side in a little bit. But that's a great place to start to familiarize yourself with an industry. Once you're able to kind of find a company that you're interested in analyzing, and I'll show you a little bit more in a bit, but once you find a company that you really like, you can actually go to the specific company BI board if it's Bloomberg Intelligence covered. I'm set on Nike right now. And Bloomberg Intelligence covers, I think it's like well over 2,000 companies right now. But you can run BICO. And this looks really similar to the industry outlook we just looked at, but this is specific for American Airlines. So some really great research here. But let's say you want to take a look more at the financial side. You can come here to the company's earnings analyzer. And this is like something that I work very closely on during earnings season. And this is what Bloomberg Intelligence has deemed to be the most important KPI metrics for assessing a company's performance and evaluating them. So you'll notice that it's not necessarily like total net income or total revenue or total liabilities. Those are like very important metrics to look at when determining the health of a company's like balance sheet or income statement. But there are specific special industry metrics that allow analysts to compare to industry peers. So things like available seat miles or load factor, which kind of looks at like what percent of flights are like, what percent of how empty they are. So like we can see this increasing over the past couple of quarters as less people are traveling due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So I would highly suggest exploring the BI boards, especially if you know what company you want to be analyzing. This is a great place to start to familiarize yourself with what research analysts are looking at right now. If you don't know what company you want to be researching, there are a couple different ways to kind of spark that for you in the terminal. So aside from getting information from news or Bloomberg Intelligence and reading headlines, you can filter down based on industries or other areas. So I like to use EQS a lot as a starting point. So EQS is our equity screening. It's automatically set for actively traded companies. We do have within fundamentals, we do cover private company financials, but we're setting this to active right now. Let's say I just started and I know I want to learn more about my industry, which is airlines. I can come here to sectors, and airlines are actually within consumer discretionary, passenger transportation, airlines. And let's say I also want to look at just the large ones. So we can look at total revenue, and we can look at a rank. So let's say we want to look at the top 50 airlines in terms of total revenue. Click enter. So you can see we filtered it down by each layer that we added. So now we can come and look at our results, and we see all of these airlines. One thing I want to touch on is like how I was able to filter the industry down. there are a couple different, so what I used back there was called BICS, Bloomberg Industry Classification. So you can go, so FLDS is like our field library. You can kind of look for anything in here, but like there's different levels of like specifying an industry. So level 1 was consumer discretionary, level 2 was passenger transportation, and then level 3 was airlines. There are also, so that's the Bloomberg industry classification. There's also GICS and NAICS and SIP codes. They're all different types of industry classification and groupings. I tend to use BICS because I work with our BICS team closely, and we're working on like updating some of our BICS codes and giving like a more granular view. But another way that we use the BICS code actually is through our segments data. So I'll touch on this very lightly, but we have segments data. So looking at a company's operating segments, as well as their geographical segments. So I can see what % of revenue is coming from passenger, the passenger segment for American Airlines versus cargo. Oh, that's revenue growth. They're all very down given the current situation. So every single one of these has their own NAICS and BICS code. So be aware of that if you're like looking to analyze a company's specific segments. Like if you look at Ford, for example, and you go to their segments page, like you think of Ford as just being like a auto manufacturer, but there's actually a financial arm to Ford where they have metrics like provision for loan loss or delinquency rates. And that's because when you go to purchase a vehicle, you can finance it through Ford's financing arm. So this will have like a financials BICS code versus like a auto manufacturing BICS code. So just one cool way to filter down. Hopping back over to American Airlines, I kind of wanted to touch on the earnings life cycle really quickly. So we checked on EVTS, which shows you like upcoming earnings releases. And we saw that American Airlines is reporting a month from today. If we look at prior quarters, prior to a company releasing their earnings, there are a couple of things that happen. So analysts are going to create broker models that model out a company's future performance based on multiple things, one of which is historical performance. So looking at how a company has performed in certain key metrics over time. And then using that to help forecast out next quarter, 2 quarters from now, and next year, what revenue will be a year from now, as an example. So you take all of those different broker models and you create a consensus. And so if we look at EEO, so this is the consensus overview. So this is showing us a very high level overview of what the street, so like an aggregation of all those broker models and analysts, how they think American Airlines is going to perform next quarter. So the consensus is that revenue will be 2.8 billion or almost 2.9 billion as in comparison to the 1.6 billion that it was in Q2. Looking at, so you have what brokers estimate your performance to be, but then companies also give something called guidance on how they think their future performance will be. So they'll put like in their 1Q press release that they have released guidance for next quarter. They think that they'll have X amount in revenue growth. Historically, like a lot of companies like stick to their guidance. They'll either come in slightly below or slightly above expectations. and what they kind of led everyone to believe. But nothing has been normal about this year so far. So for the first time, like in prior years, I think we've had a total of under 100 companies withdraw their guidance. So say we are going to be far off base, we're withdrawing this, so no one like models based off of this. Under 100 companies in total for the past couple of years have withdrawn their guidance. But since February 2020, over almost 1,100 companies have withdrawn guidance so far in North America alone. And that includes 40% of the S&P 500, so some of the largest organizations in the United States. So looking at, we have a function that allows you to analyze company guidance. So you can see that American Airlines suspended their Q1 and full year 2020 guidance. So we store this data, so it's usable in this function, but we can actually take a look and find all of this out from company news. So there's a couple different ways to do it. This was back in March, but I can come here. So this is company news, and you can kind of filter down and add advanced searches to it. So I'm going to just type in guidance. And it was back on like March 10th. I went too far. So you can see here, American Airlines suspends 1Q 2020 forecast on coronavirus. Or like this Dow Jones article, American Airlines withdraws its 2020 guidance. So when a company puts out a statement like this, we take that data, we make sure that's reflected correctly on guidance, and then that's going to also impact estimates down the line. So if we come over to, let's see, there's a couple different earnings estimates related functions that are really great for analysis. So you can look at earnings history. This is my favorite one because it incorporates the reported data, which is what I work with. So you can see here in orange, you have like this column for announcement date, the period, and then period end. So announcement date is like the day that you report your earnings release. It never usually coincides with the last day of the quarter. So there'll be a little, like a couple week lag between this column and this column. But you can see here in orange, these are all quarters that have already come and gone, and the company has already reported its 10K or 10Q for. So those are all in orange, and you see a reported column here. So this is telling me that like this was the actual value that was in the company's 10Q that has been captured on the FA function. I'm just going to change this to revenue really quickly. So, and then we have the comparables, which comes from also within the company filings. It has to do with being estimated on the same basis. And then we have the estimate. So we talked a little bit about like what the street thinks. So these are the values that the street has estimated out for these given quarters on what they think revenue will be. So you can see like 2 quarters ago at year end, revenue was estimated at 11.3 billion. The company reported 11.313 billion. So like it was very close. Like it was a great consensus. Then coronavirus hit and no one really knew what to expect. So we can see in Q1 2020, revenue dropped down to around 8.8 billion. And it dropped a little bit further. Sorry, it dropped a little bit further than everyone thought it would. And then fast forward to 2Q 2020, and revenue is down to 1.6 billion. So everyone knew it was going to drop. The street like played it safe and thought it would drop to 1.43 billion. American Airlines came in at 1.6 billion, so they beat expectations, and you see this positive surprise number here. So this is saying the company performed better than people thought they would. And by people, I mean the analysts with their broker models. So this is used to calculate a surprise. You'll notice that there's no values here. That is because these periods haven't occurred yet. We'll see this fill in on October 23rd, and we'll find out, was their revenue over 2.9 billion, or did they come in below? And then that's going to impact the surprise. So that kind of looks at like how people think the company is going to perform. And then I touched on how the company actually performs. And you can view all of that on the FA function. So when the next period comes, there will be a 2020 Q3 period created. So looking at the morning of October 23rd, I'm probably going to be up at around 6 o'clock in the morning. The company's going to report their earnings. And then we're going to get some key high level metrics that come in. So looking at revenue, net income, like the very important things within the first like 3 to 5 minutes, upwards of 10 sometimes. And then the rest of the financials from the company's press release will be processed shortly after, followed by when the company releases their full filing, which comes through, we can see here in CF. You can see like all the different filing types that come through. A lot of this is coming directly from the SEC. We have a direct feed called the Edgar feed. So a lot of these filings all come through there, but you can see when they release their 10Q, that's where the full financials are from. So some companies release their full financial reports the same day that they release their earnings report, but some days or some companies can have like a couple week lag. But that data is all used for the FA function. So we have key stats, what we've deemed most important. We have all 3 of your main statements here. One thing to note is that we have, for like the income statement, I don't know how many of you have taken accounting classes, but you have like GAAP or IFRS if you're from another country, and then adjusted. So Bloomberg has some adjustments based on certain charges, and then as reported. So like there's no formulas here. These are just all straight values from the company's report. If you like want to see how Bloomberg were to adjust a value, you can click through the value. So Jordan talked a little bit about like transparency in our office. We have the exact same thing here on the terminal where we believe in market transparency. And so you can click through any value or formula and see exactly where from the financial statements that value is captured. So this is really helpful when clients want to validate a data point or ask how we got to a certain number in a formula. And this is a really great way to show them that it's coming directly from how the company reported it. So we also have our COVID-19 fields. We created around 50 new fields after COVID hit to analyze the impact of COVID-19 on a company's performance. So we have a qualitative field up here, which is your COVID-19 operational impact. So whether they were severely impacted or just barely impacted, as well as specific COVID-19 related charges. So you may look at an airline and they're going to have a lot more COVID-19 related charges here, but then maybe you look at Zoom and they didn't have to add any charges for COVID-19 related things. So this is a really cool thing to use in tandem with that virus function. Another thing, briefly, you can create your own custom displays here. So you can type in like any metric here, or I showed you that FLDS field library earlier, and you can add that in. I very quickly wanted to touch on 2 different functions that I think are used in tandem with fundamentals and earnings estimates data. One of them is SPLC, so supply chain analysis. So here, if you recall, there was a section on the Bloomberg Intelligence Industry Board talking about like suppliers for airlines and that being an impact. So some of you may have seen headlines in the past couple of months about Boeing. So Boeing is one of the large suppliers for American Airlines, them, Airbus, Bombardier. And so it's really interesting to look after earnings or based on different events that occur, how a supplier may impact the performance then of the company and then on the customers. So airlines are a little different where they don't have like, they're not going to list all of us individually as customers. But you can see that there. I also briefly want to touch on ESG. So can anyone tell me what ESG stands for, ESG investing?
Environment, social governance.
Awesome, yes. So this has been a hot topic over the past 10 years, but during the past 6 months during COVID-19, it really has picked up as well. We've seen a lot more interest in this area. And so it's looking at environmental, social, and governance metrics. And so different types of companies in different industries are required to report certain things. Like an oil and gas company is required to report certain like CO2 emissions. And then some companies like voluntarily disclose more information. There are certain standards set aside and certain like standard setting bodies that encourage companies to report this and help make sure that it's all like on the same basis, at least within an industry. So you can see here, like in comparison to peers, American Airlines is better than its peers in environmental and social pillars, but worse off in the governance. And so you can see some of the factors that come into here are like load factor. So what percent of planes are flying, like how empty they are. What percent of employees are women. So another really cool thing that I'm super passionate about is Bloomberg has the GEI index, or the Gender Equality Index. So it's an index of companies that have a certain percent of female leadership and female board members. And it tracks their performance against, let's say, the S&P 500. And over time, you can see there have been a lot of studies done on this, that like more diverse boards and management committees tend to perform better in the long run. So we've seen a lot of investors turn towards these types of data sets, like non-traditional, non-financial data sets, to supplement their fundamental analysis, because you can get a lot of information from this. You can get a good understanding of how risky a company might be down the line. So ESG is another really cool function. This data also all lives in FA as well. So not everything is going to be populated because companies aren't necessarily required to disclose all of this all the time, but it's an annual data set. Lastly, we talked a little bit at the beginning about like equity screening and how to figure out like different companies in an industry or different companies like from a different geographical location. One other great tool to use is RV, the relative valuation. So coming here, it defaults to this, but pretty much what it's looking at American Airline, and then it has these peers down here. Oh, actually it didn't. When you guys try this, it's probably going to default to Analysts curated BI. So the peers that it's pulling are the peers that Bloomberg Intelligence has deemed most comparable to American Airlines. And it looks at like key metrics like market cap, revenue, growth. You can also like add your own columns here. But if you wanted to use one of those other unique identifiers or industry identifiers that we talked about, you can switch as well. So you can look at the NAICS codes, the SIC codes, industry classification benchmarks, the GICS codes, And by changing this, like it can expand the number of peers that you're analyzing. So we saw that got larger. And this is just a really great tool to get an understanding of the key players in the industry. Because when you're doing company analysis, you want to be looking at what people are expecting. So on the earnings estimate side, how the company has performed over time, how their peers are performing. And this is one way to be able to understand who the peers are. And then tying in those non-financial data sets like supply chain or ESG makes for a really well-rounded fundamental analysis. So I know we threw a lot at you. There's a couple minutes left. Does anyone have any questions? All right.
So again, thank you, Maya and Freya. I think you've shown everybody about 1% of the terminal's functionality today. As I said, you keep impressing me with how much more there is to learn about this powerful tool. So appreciate your time today. Appreciate your showing us what we have learned and we'll be applying this semester. For those of you that were here today, again, this was being recorded, so you should be able to go back and use this as a reference. If you do not have any other questions, I want to thank our Bloomberg guests for their time today. It's been a long day for them. Really appreciate you guys doing this and being here, great partners. And for the rest of you, basically make sure that, again, appreciate the applause on the icons there. For the rest of you, make sure that you're ready to go with your group cases presentations on Monday. Again, we're got 6 teams to get through. So each team's gonna have 10 minutes. We will start exactly on time and make sure all of the information is turned in before at 10 a.m. TAs have office hours tomorrow and Friday. So if you have any questions, please leverage them. And again, Jordan, last word, do you have any other information you'd like to give about recruiting before we go?
Sure. So I'll throw my email in the chat here if anyone has any follow-up questions. But our open roles will be posted on HireSmith within the next couple of weeks. And we look forward to welcoming even more Terps to Bloomberg.
Great. Well, again, thank you so much for today. And thanks everybody for a good day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.